Good evening, everyone. I am David Mandel with Ohel Children's Home and Family Services, and it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's Ohel TheraZoom. TheraZoom is a platform initiated by Ohel following the beginning of COVID, in which we speak with the community, with families, with children, with adolescents, with people of all ages, with educators, not only locally and regionally, but throughout the nation and internationally also. I'd like to thank Sivi Ryder, who's taken the lead in organizing the TheraZoom platform. TheraZoom is Ohel's therapy by Zoom. These are not necessarily, this is not necessarily therapy, they are conversations. This evening's conversation is titled, How Are Our Kids Doing? Teachers, social workers, and psychologists give you the inside story. We're very happy that this evening is co-sponsored by Hidden Sparks, and I will introduce Sarah Diamond in one moment. Next week, Tuesday evening, Ohel's TheraZoom is hosting a one-year anniversary. It is unfortunate and remarkable that 1 year has passed, and just a tremendous, terrible milestone to hear today that 500,000 people have passed away from COVID or COVID-related illnesses. And the number of people that have been affected by it is really just staggering in so many different ways. And hopefully tonight's conversation will help individuals that are listening with their children and their community. We invite you to submit your questions on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or on your chat functions. Following each of our presenters' comments, we will go to questions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Diamond from Hidden Sparks, Ohel's co-sponsor this evening. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much, David. You know, at Hidden Sparks, we are always so excited to partner with our colleagues at Ohel. And particularly over the winter months, we have been hearing a lot from parents that there are increased challenges in keeping their children's spirits up, providing opportunities for socialization, and really maintaining that enthusiasm for schooling. So we're very appreciative to be able to bring the expertise of the panel to our parent participants tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Let me introduce this evening's panelists. First, Dr. Norman Blumenthal. Dr. Norman Blumenthal is Ohel's director, the Zach Chair of Trauma and Bereavement, who will serve as a moderator of the discussion. Barbara Hollander, who is at Hebrew Academy of Nassau County, a social worker in the early childhood program. Dr. Ben Goldman at Rosenbaum Yeshiva of New Jersey. Dr. Carly Namdar at HALB, Hebrew Academy of Long Beach, psychologist in the middle school, grades 6 to 8. And Rachel Mirzeoff at Katz Yeshiva High School in Boca Raton, Florida. It's a distinct pleasure to welcome you all this evening to the program. With that, let me turn it over to Dr. Norman Blumenthal.
Okay, good evening. I'm really going to make just some very brief introductory remarks, so we want to hear from the panelists. I personally do not work in a school currently, so I don't have that firsthand encounter with the children, but I'd like to just sort of place a framework for the discussion, and then we'll hear from the people who actually are in the school. I actually did at one point in my career, many more years ago than I care to think, was the school psychologist, not a school psychologist in the Hebrew day school, but in the Hebrew day school that my children went to. And that was a very interesting experience, particularly regarding one of my children, of course, I shall remain nameless, who was a particularly challenging child. And I remember sometimes walking down the hallway and seeing one of his teachers walking towards me, and I got very good at quickly dodging them and running into the men's room to make sure I wouldn't have to have an encounter with that teacher. That's unusual. Most of us have a very different relationship with the school. And if you think about it, it's pretty remarkable what kind of relationship we have with our schools. I mean, if we, there's nothing probably more precious to us than our children, and there's probably nobody who we care to protect and insulate from any kind of harm than, of course, our sons and daughters. And yet, on a pretty regular basis, almost on a daily basis, we hand them over to another institution for the bulk of their day. And that is a leap of faith that is pretty remarkable, because we entrust our children to the schools, and the schools who take on this huge responsibility are taking, you know, what is most precious to these parents and attending to their needs and making sure they're safe. I know I once heard from an owner of a sleepaway camp that he and his wife didn't sleep the entire summer because just of awareness and the onus of responsibility that they're facing, and yet we do so. And I think we can do so in part because of our trust in the school. And I think tonight your trust will be emboldened by seeing what kind of professionals you have watching over your children. But this partnership becomes all the more important during the pandemic. Typically, when we feel threatened, when there's danger, we seek out partnerships. There's a classic study that was done many years ago in which what they did in the study, they got a research assistant to walk halfway across a bridge, and then the subject in the study to meet that research assistant in the middle of the bridge, and then assess how appealing or attractive they felt this research assistant was. The only difference was that for one set of experiment, the bridge was steady. In the other set of experiment, the bridge was shaky. And pretty consistently, people who were on the quote unquote shaky bridge assessed the research assistant as more appealing and more attractive than those who were on the steady bridge. Because when we feel threatened, when we feel in some way endangered, we seek out others and we seek a connection with others. And therefore, our partnership with the schools become all the more important during these what feel to be very treacherous times. So I'm going to encourage again all of you to listen, to hear, and to submit questions to this collection of really top mental health professionals who will share with you their observations and their suggestions. The mental health professional in the school is very different than he or she was back even when I was the psychologist in a school. It used to be that our job as a psychologist in school was to attend to the kids that were struggling, the kids who had problems. The mental health professionals today attend to those children, but also attend to their overall mental health. And in fact, schools in general today see the social and emotional adjustment of their students as of equal importance, I would say, to the information and skills that they impart. So I welcome this panel. I welcome the panelists. I think you'll feel even more assured when you hear what they have to say, but also give you a chance to hear from the inside how our children are coping and what the challenges are. So I join you in looking forward to it and being part of this.
Let's begin with Barbara Hollander, please.
Hello.
Many children today are complaining about restraints that they're experiencing, not physical restraints, but social restraints or educational restraints. Give some advice to parents how they can respond to their children when the children are, let's not call it complaining, because today there's some legitimate reasons that children can complain. When children are simply saying, why can't I? How come my friend can? Why are you keeping me back from? What can you advise parents how to respond to their children?
Okay. And before I start, I am in the elementary school, not just the early childhood. I just want to throw that out there. So we're all tired of COVID restraints. This has been a really hard year. Social distancing, masking, we can't get together the way we want to. Our kids are too. Our kids are really, really feeling it. And there are two parts. There's the part of what we're all tired of. Kids are tired of Zoom, which was at first so exciting and so cool. What technology. But now it feels like enough. And when school is closed and kids have to go on Zoom, it's draining. There's the other part that you touched on, that different families have different standards. David can get together with play dates. Sarah can't, Sarah's family doesn't allow play dates, and that is hard. Parents have a really powerful tool with their kids, and that is connection. And that is maybe the most powerful tool a parent can have. You don't have to agree with what your child is saying, but if you can really take the time to listen and show empathy and show that you really understand. Let's say your child is really complaining about having to wear a mask in school. I hear that, and explore it with him. What is the most uncomfortable part for you? I get it. Or a child who has to be on Zoom. I know it's really hard. Take that time. Try to find those moments every day or at night to connect with your child. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be frustrated. You also need to let your child know you have to offer gentle, realistic hope. It's going to get, after they have expressed themselves and they feel you hear them, it is going to get better. And you speak about some of the things that we're all seeing, vaccines, rates going down. And then the third part, which is really important, is you could do this. We're going to get through this, and you're going to get through this, and I am with you. So never underestimate your power of listening to your child and of connecting and being with him.
Thanks, Barbara. So, Rachey Mirzeoff at Katz Yeshiva High School in Boca Raton. Let me reframe that in the opposite direction. If my kids are doing great, I really don't see any issue. They seem to be adjusting educationally, socially. Everything seems to be going well. Should I worry that there's something is not going well, that I'm missing something, that they're really not doing as well as they appear to be?
Okay, first off, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Ohel, for everything that you do, and Hidden Sparks. So that's a great question, because I think as parents, we often try to find, well, what's wrong? There is a global pandemic. There has to be something wrong. And I have to say, I live in Florida, so it's a different ballgame here. It's an open state. So forgive me, people listening from New York, New Jersey, where things may be very different. But what we found is that a lot of our students are suffering with things that we wouldn't have expected, whether it's, we went for the big ones, the anxiety, the depression, the suicidal ideation. And yes, there are definitely a few. But we're also finding that our kids are really, really suffering in the sense of understanding their role in this pandemic, in their sense of understanding who am I and where's my voice and what am I allowed to feel and what am I not allowed to feel, and is it okay to go against, what my school is saying? Is it okay to go against what my parents are saying? I'm kind of an adult in this way. So I think for high school kids, we have to understand that they have their own opinions and they have their own thoughts. And because of that, they sometimes feel very, very frustrated that they're not being heard. They're not being heard, not in the sense of tell me what's going on for you, but they're not being heard in the sense of someone understand and relate to what I'm going through. Someone get it, just get it. I had a student the other day come and she was crying and crying. And I said, what's going on? And she said, it's my birthday and I'm a senior and I just can't believe I'm not going to spend my last birthday at home the way I always thought because of this crazy pandemic. And here I am thinking in my head, are you joking me? Your birthday? Come on, there's so much going on. But it wasn't about understanding that which she was upset about. It was relating to the feeling of a loss. It was about relating to that feeling, getting inside myself and answering from her angle, from her point of view. And I think as parents, as educators, as mental health professionals, we have to get to their level. We have to understand the feeling, not just the circumstance, but the feeling.
Dr. Goldman, Director of Psychology and Guidance at the Rosenbaum Yeshiva of North Jersey. Rachey mentioned the word adult. I'm an adult, we're adults. Well, we as adults, she was speaking about the 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. In some way, we are adults, 16-year-olds, but in some way, we're not. We still live at home under the auspices and guidance of our parents. But we're accustomed to certain milestones. We're halfway through the year. We're looking forward to our graduation. We're looking forward to maybe going to seminary or yeshiva in Israel. Some of the high school kids miss going away for intercession, but their friends went. Some of the friends are going away for Pesach to wherever they're going, and many others are staying home for many different circumstances. How do you advise a 16 and a 17-year-old who has prepared their entire high school for these milestones, and they consider themselves adults, but they're missing so many things that you can't make up next year or the year after? Dr. Goldman. Dr. Goldman, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. So before I answer that question, it's a great question. I also want to express hakaras hatov. My son is a Kaylee camper from the second summer, and he would not have had a place to go to camp if not for that incredible place. So I owe a lot of gratitude to Ohel. It's when we're dealing with kids who have missed out, there are a few different angles. In some ways, we talk about this lost generation as if missing or going to school remotely for the months that we were in isolation just means that our children will never be what they were going to be. And in that way, I think that it is a little overblown. The same milestones might not be reached at the same time. The reading milestones might be a few months later this year than they were in the past, but children are progressing pretty much as a cohort, and teachers are relating to the kids where they are, and children will catch up. In terms of missing the life milestones, it's really hard. And on the one hand, we have some parents have this urge to kind of make children feel like it's all going to be okay. And, only positive attitude and look on the bright side, because we want so much for our kids to be happy. And we also want them to learn to have a positive attitude. But when you do that, it can be really invalidating. If you're not really appreciating what it's like for that child, we've been out of it a long time. It's been a long time since my 8th grade graduation. And it might be hard for me to appreciate just how much my 8th grader was looking forward to it. So really trying to see where that child is and meeting them where they're at, balancing encouragement with validation. I see this is really hard. And it's hard for a parent too that you can't fix it, but looking for positives, looking at ways in which this year might be special. I made a bat mitzvah this year, and in many ways it was not what my daughter might have expected, but there were so many beautiful things about it. So I was able to point those things out without saying, yeah, wasn't that better than what we would have had? Because it still could be that that's what you would have wanted. So finding that balance between validation and encouragement, I think, is very important.
And pointing things out to your children, to your adolescent children, without sounding like a parent. It sounds like that's a little bit of what you're saying also. You can be a friend to your child, but you don't always have to explain it like a parent. Colin Namdar, Director of Middle School Guidance at HALB. Some words, Carly, that have been used often are anxiety, the increase in anxiety, isolation, especially by the use of technology. Many parents have asked, what is the fine line between normal anxiety, normal isolation, and normal use of technology versus when does it cross a line that I think that my child may need some professional help?
Okay. First of all, I just want to echo the other panelists here and say a huge thank you for Ohel for all the incredible work you're doing. And we're really proud to be partnering with you at HALB and some great mental health initiatives. I think that, talking about, I think there's two aspects to your question. I think talking about normal levels of anxiety and this tech reliance that we've kind of developed in our kids. I think that, our students really have come to really rely on technology throughout this pandemic. Nobody really asked to be put on Zoom. Our kids were kind of forced into it. And at first, like the other panelists said, it seemed like it was, novel. It was great. And then I think that, Zoom doesn't really work for everybody. And I think that many students have learned to navigate things well and learned to navigate their tech use well. But many other students are struggling with the amount of times they've had to be on tech. And they're also seeing that, they may just be reacting against what they're going through and deciding that, I'm just going to spend a lot of time on social media. I'm just going to watch and I'm just kind of going to want to do what I want to do. I think kids have gotten used to a lot of multitasking while they're on Zoom. And we know that the middle school brain and, adolescents' brains are not geared to be able to manage, being on your phone and being on your tech while you're meant to be in classes. Kids might have fallen into habits that are not as healthy. I think it's really, really important to stress, like the other panelists have mentioned, this idea of giving kids an understanding of what technology is doing to them and how they have control over the tech that they're using, understanding that what technology, when it's excessive, can really do to the brain, and really helping them as parents, helping guide them as to what's healthy, what you expect of them in terms of technology. But I think if you see that, routines that your children might have, had these healthy routines established, if they've kind of gone awry, if they're staying up till all hours on their devices, if it's interfering with their sleeping patterns, I think that's a problem. If, they're more irritable than usual, I think that may be a problem. I think there's normal reactions to stress and anxiety, and we've all been stressed during this pandemic. And I think that when it's really altering their mood, their patterns of interaction, when they're not really enjoying the things that they used to have been enjoying, I think that's a sign as a parent, and you usually know when something's not quite right with your child, that it may be time to get some help. And I do really think that, I think most panelists here tonight would agree with me that communication is key, and opening the lines of communication in a really non-judgmental way with your child, and letting them know that, you yourself might be struggling, or many of their peers might be struggling, and validating what they're going through, empathizing what they're going through is really important, helping to guide them, give those controls, and also letting the school know that maybe, you may need some help with your child, and, working together if you reach that point is really, really key.
Dr. Blumenthal, as Dr. Family Director of Trauma and Crisis Intervention at Ohel, and also the Educational Director of the Bella and Harry Wexner Kollel Elyon and Smicha Honor Program at Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. Dr. Blumenthal, we've often heard you use the expression that in trauma, it's the normal reaction to abnormal events. And Carly just mentioned some of the items on the continuum, if you will, of anxiety, what's good and what to look out for. Can you elaborate some of your experiences in not only situation of like this pandemic that we're living through, but traumatic events, highly anxious events, how parents can identify early warning signs.
Okay. So actually, in terms of early warning signs, I'm going to reference a story of the father of psychology, a story about Sigmund Freud. In 1912, Sigmund Freud made his one and only trip to America to introduce the United States to the theories of psychoanalysis. And he gave a week-long lectures at Clark University, which is a university in Massachusetts. And professors from all around the country, and this was before there was air travel. So great difficulty schlepped, as we say in America, to Clark University to hear this now world famous professor introducing this whole new area of study. And the plan was that Freud would speak for 3 days, lecture for 3 days, and that'd be 3 days of question and answer. So those of you who are suffering through this webinar know that you got away with murder compared to them. So for 3 days, and Freud was quite loquacious. He's lectured on all his new theories about neuroses, etc. And then came the 3 days of questions. And one of the first questions, someone raised their hand and said, Professor Freud, you just spent 3 days telling us what's abnormal. What's normal? And everybody braced themselves for 3 more days of lectures. And he said 3 words. And it's probably the most famous part of those lectures. He said, Leben und Arbeiten, love and work. If you want to know if you yourself or your child is doing okay, check out their relationships and check out their work. And for children, work is school. And if they're preserving their relationships and if they're functioning academically, and I'd probably add, if I may, also if their general temperament is okay and their physical health, and I'm talking about not an actual illness, but if there's a lot of complaints of headaches and stomach aches or disturbed sleep, those are, I would say, would be signs that something's not quite right. The younger the child, the less precise the child is. Young children tend to feel ughy. The older the child, when they have the vocabulary, can more, precisely pinpoint how they're feeling, although there may be more shame, especially among an adolescent, to have to approach the parent. But one rule of thumb: never, ever be afraid to ask. You're asking about your child's well-being will not plant the seed in their mind. And if you ask your child, are they having anxiety? Are they distraught? They're not going to say, gee, I never thought about that. Maybe I'll become anxious and maybe I'll become distraught. If you're asking with the right intention, and if you engender that kind of trusting relationship, you can ask. And if they say no, and by the way, sometimes they'll say no and you drop it. And then 3 days later, remember you asked, so be prepared for that as well.
Dr. Goldman, we're hearing a lot about some of the skills that some of the children at every single age may be missing, socially, educationally, cognitively. Is there a way for parents to make up what they consider to be some of the lost cognitive skills or executive functioning skills? And could you define what we mean by cognitive and executive functioning, and how we might be able to make up those areas that we're concerned that our child may be missing or losing?
Okay, yeah. So when we talk about cognitive development, that's a broad term for the kind of growth and development our brain does. There are a lot of different areas of cognitive development. Reading is one aspect of it. There are a lot of different ways that we develop cognitively, or interacting socially, or free play. Those are all things that help the brain grow and develop. And, I think it's important to remember that our kids weren't just hibernating during the quarantine, but they were doing things that might not have been classroom learning, as much at least, but there was development going on. I think the things that really suffered were what we call executive functioning that you referenced. The executive in executive functioning is like the executive in a company, being able to see things with an overhead view, planning, goal-oriented behavior, not getting caught up with distractions, being able to shift when we get to a roadblock. And those are all things that really are scaffolded in classrooms, especially in the younger classrooms where there's a lot of structure, and the demands in the classroom are also met with teachers who help the children organize their things, write down their assignments and things like that. And what we saw is that when we were in quarantine, a lot of children had a hard time structuring themselves and just keeping track of the different things that they needed to do, being able to manage their time, and the kind of student skills that we're used to seeing develop over the course of a year and maybe dip a little bit over the summer, but students come back to the next school year pretty much with those same school student skills and able to build on those. There were a lot of children who struggled with that. And in particular, the children who are just by their makeup have trouble with executive functions. And, you know, most famously, these are the kids with ADHD, but not exclusively so. And so what I would say is it's important for parents to be that scaffold to see, you know, how is my child doing with keeping track of the things they need to do? How are they with being able to estimate the time that it takes them to do something and the time that they have, being able to keep their materials together. And if your child is struggling with that, to help them, you know, come up with a system to make sure that all your assignments are written down. You can work on just time sense by having kids for a couple of weeks, just try to estimate in advance how long something is going to take them and time it and see how long did it take you. Talk out your own executive functioning. You know, if you're trying to figure out how much time you have and what you're going to be able to fit into that time, narrate it, be transparent, you know, make yourself a model for how you handle those things. And again, as Carly said, be in touch with your child's teachers. There's so much more that we can accomplish when parents and the school are working together. And you can find out a lot about how your child is doing in the classroom, and you can give them a lot of information about how your child does at home.
Mrs. Hollander, Dr. Goldman spoke about scaffolding, a very important word. In the younger grades, of course, scaffolding takes place in the younger grades where they learn and they build upon, and then they build more and develop some of the skills. We have a situation today, not necessarily where children in nursery or kindergarten or the younger grades are wearing masks, but they see masks all around them. And they don't recognize people as easily or other children as easily. They may not hear the words as clearly as they normally would without a mask. What can parents do to deal with that, to reassure children, to make up for some of those situations so that children shouldn't be scared of a person that they might see who's wearing a mask, because masks are with us to stay for longer than we would like. Some advice to parents, please.
They absolutely are. And in many kindergartens and preschools, kids are wearing masks also. And I've noticed, you know, babies even kids adapt very quickly. And I think babies are even used to seeing people with masks. I always thought they would be frightened, but it's just become our reality, and it seems to be everywhere. There's a lot that parents can do. Parents can, you know, talk about feelings, hear the children's feelings, show expression. I notice kids are learning to read other children's eyes and teachers' eyes, and teachers, the way they express themselves, the words they use. So I think kids are picking up a lot more than we think they're picking up. But I think parents have a very key role in a child's social, emotional development. in helping them with awareness of emotions, in helping them with self-regulation, in helping them with empathy skills, how to really hear somebody else and how to show you care to somebody else. And we have a program starting in kindergarten, we use in a number of grades called Second Step, which focuses a lot of emotional self-awareness. What are you feeling? Where do you feel it in your body when you're angry, when you're scared, when you're sad? And with the older grades, we plan to utilize some of Ohel's wonderful programs. One is the Resilience Program, which really helps kids develop coping skills. And in our 6th grade, we've had 3 sessions so far of the MAP program, Middle School Anxiety Prevention Program. And the basis of all of these programs, even though they have different slants, is self-awareness of emotions and how to express them. And I think the more open parents are with that, and in modeling empathy, and something that everyone so far has spoken about is the real importance of empathy and validation of our children. And that doesn't mean we agree with what they're saying, but we try to enter their hearts and their minds. And what are you feeling? And even sharing some of your own in an age appropriate way. And, knowing what to shield them from in terms of media, especially the young ones. I've heard 6th graders say to me, I watched the news last night. Am I going to have a future? And it's really it was very painful to hear. So we have to be careful what kids are exposed to, and we have to find that balance and find ways to impart hope and protect them. But I think parents model a lot of those important social emotional skills that help kids cope with what's going on, whether it's masks or distancing or whatever it is.
Mrs. Hollander mentioned the Resilience Workbook. Tzivi Ryder and David Leaptag developed My COVID-19 Resilience Workbook. You can find it on Ohel, and it's a wonderful workbook for children, for preschool children. It can be used at any age, in which they can express through art, through stories, through writings, their experiences during COVID. And it's really generalizable to any age. My COVID-19 Resilience Workbook. Mrs. Mirzeoff and Mrs. Namdar, I'd like to ask you both a question. First to Rachey Mirzeoff, and also Carly, you're also a psychologist at Camp Kaylee in the summertime in the Girls Month. So it's always great to see you there. Thank you for mentioning, and the others also. Rachey Mirzeoff, let's go from Barbara Hollander and preschool, early childhood. Let's go to high school. I remember several years ago being called into high school, speaking with juniors and seniors who experienced a lot of anxiety. This had nothing to do with COVID. This had nothing to do with 9/11. This was just anxiety in juniors and high school seniors. And after a lengthy conversation, we got to what they're anxious about. This was a high school in which a significant number of junior and high school students were going off to Ivy League colleges. And as much as they like to talk about independence, they were very scared. They were very nervous, going away from home, living on their own, moving away from some of their closest friends, wanting to be in that Ivy League school, but there was a tremendous amount of anxiety associated with it. And we discussed the uncertain life ahead of them, wonderful futures, Ivy League, uncertainty. Here we are today, junior and high school seniors, a whole different kind of uncertainty. What are we doing? What's the future of our life? Barbara mentioned that some people are worried, am I going to have a future? We read the unemployment reports. Some family members may have lost their jobs. There's a lot of uncertainty. Speak to junior and high school students and their parents about how to deal with the uncertainty ahead of us.
It's a great question. And I think like the COVID-19 as a whole, I think the theme around it is dealing with uncertainty, really dealing with uncertainty. And I think one of the benefits actually for our high school students is that they've had to deal with these uncomfortable feelings of uncertainty really, really quickly. And they had to do it not alone. They weren't alone in it. They got to see their parents as examples on how to deal with this uncertainty. They got to see their teachers. They got to see mental health professionals in their school as examples. And I think you're right. I think for 11th and 12th graders who are thinking about, I'm ready to go to college, I'm ready to go to my year in Israel, but I don't even know what that's gonna look like. Am I gonna have roommates? Is this gonna be virtual? What is this gonna look like? And I think, we have to understand, obviously, the validation, the acceptance that this is extremely difficult. We also have to utilize that which they have gained during this pandemic. What it means to work through the uncomfortable, not to run away from it, not to look to other things to avoid it, but to deal with it, to face it head on. Because little do we know, our students have actually really surprised us with their resiliency and with their ability to face uncomfortable feelings head on. And I think if we empower them to utilize that which they have gained in this pandemic and to look towards the future with it, not just to use it now, but to take it with you for the rest of your life. They've really learned life lessons here. And I think if we can hone in on those and shed light to them, I think that could really go a long way for them.
So you're turning it around and saying that this is even a greater opportunity to show independence and maturity and adulthood.
Don't quote me. I'm not for the pandemic, but yes.
Take advantage of every opportunity presented. Carly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was great, Rachey. I think that our kids are really wired to, especially at the middle school age, they're really wired to seek predictability as much as they might be like raging against it. I think that predictability and I think that routines and knowing what's to come is for the most part reassuring. And I think that, like what Rachey said, I think learning that, we don't always have control and learning to sit comfortably with that has been, I think, one of the biggest life lessons of this pandemic. And I think that the idea that, Tal Ben-Shahar, he's one of the big people in positive psychology, talks a lot about this idea of our emotions flow through a pipeline and all emotions are okay. Validating that whatever our children might be feeling or whatever they're anxious about, it's okay to be going through right now. And there's also this idea of, radical acceptance that you might be experiencing a certain emotion right now. You might be nervous. You might want to know what's going on. And that's, validate that and really have empathy with your child for that. But that doesn't have to take control of everything and consume you right now. So I think that as parents, even as mental health professionals in the school, letting the kids know that all emotions are okay. This pandemic is unique in the fact that we're all going through this together at the same time. Everybody all around the world. This isn't something that's isolated to just us right now. It's something that everyone is experiencing and validating our kids, having these conversations, even in the context of a classroom, so that kids can hear that they're not the only ones going through this is important. Asking our children, what do you need? What is it that's going on for you right now? And elevating their voices, allowing them to tell us what's really going on. Giving them some control is important. Give them the opportunity to make choices where they can, and respect their coping style is also something that's, I think, is really important. And I think for us to really, notice our children's strengths, notice them where they're doing good, notice what they're capable of, notice, how they're coping with things, what serves them well. We all have these character strengths. Each of us have character strengths within us. And often we bounce back on those character strengths when we're going through a hard time. And we have these beautiful strengths of spirituality and hope and gratitude that are just inbuilt within our community, within our Jewish religion. And seeking comfort through that is something that's extremely powerful. And it really does also build a lot of resilience for our children. So,
Dr. Blumenthal, Colleen Namdar used the word control several times, and I liked how she used it in terms of parents giving some control to their kids and watching it. Could you break it down and maybe in some age groups about the amount of control that parents should be comfortable and confident in giving their kids at different age groups? There are many parents who, let me turn it around. There are many kids who feel that the parents don't give them any control. And conversely, there are parents who feel that, I don't trust my son or my daughter yet to give them control. But today, life is a little bit different. Talk about control and how parents can give it over safely.
Okay. Well, this is touches upon what I often refer to as the age-old paradox of parenting, which is, as I mentioned earlier, nothing's more precious to us than our children. And if you have something extremely valuable, you hoard it, you hold on to it. And yet, if we do our job right with our kids, they leave us. That's our goal. And it doesn't make sense because you think you want to hold on to them. And of course, you don't have to look further than the Torah, where when the family is first invented, when Chava, Eve, is invented, the narrative stops for an editorial comment. It's unusual, which says, that from now on, children will abandon their parents. So part of when we say giving over control is nurturing that autonomy, obviously at age appropriate levels. You're certainly going to be dictating more to the younger children and handing over the decisions to some of the older children. And you actually come to a point, and this would probably be true with the group that Rachey Mirzeoff is dealing with, in other words, the high school students, where you can actually watch your child make a bad decision. And whereas with the younger children, you would correct it and remedy it, you might actually make a conscious decision to let them decide and learn for themselves, because that's a powerful lesson. You're certainly with adolescents, if you are going to give over some advice, you're going to sort of give it over more tentatively than you would to a younger child. I think another very important part, which I think a few people have been alluding to, and I think it's important also, is that I think our relationship, our ever evolving relationship with technology, is going to go through a very big change when all this is over. I think we have been so dependent on Zoom that this kind of remote contact is going to become, whether it's in medicine, psychotherapy, or education, this is going to become more the norm. It may not be as much as it is now, but it's going to become, I think it's going to be integrated more broadly into our education. As someone who has for many years championed the needs of those who don't quite fit in, Barbara can remember our early years of putting Ohel together. I think that's a wonderful development, because if you want to tailor to individual students, it's much easier to do so with a computer program than for a teacher in front of the classroom. So I think, and again, that also requires, because when you talk about control, the art of managing internet and technology is for you to control it instead of it controlling you. And I think that's another very important lesson, as we're so dependent now on the internet and remote contact to impart those lessons to our children.
Like any good educator or principal, we've done some problem solving this evening, presenting some difficult issues and questions and asking each of you to comment on it. I'd like to talk about only some positive aspects of what we've experienced in the following way. I've shared with my colleagues that I'm a firm believer that there's always good that comes out of bad. We just have to figure out how to do it. And so my comment about COVID is that every one of us has to come out better or different from COVID. I know, of course, that we're speaking to an audience that has gone through horrible situations with grief, with loss, with death, people being in hospitals and nursing home by themselves. There aren't even any words to describe it. But I would like to focus on the following. Each of you has been involved in the last year with tens, scores, hundreds of students and family members. I'd like to call on each of you to give an example of a highlight, something that so incredibly moved you, something that so incredibly surprised you, something that you saw that people can learn from, that maybe there's an aha moment, or they can discuss it with their child, or they can introduce it. Anybody, who would like to go first? This is a classroom. Raise your hand. Okay, Carly, thank you.
Okay. I think that the students' resilience has really blown me away. I think that we've come a long way in getting students comfortable in talking about what they're going through, and just being more comfortable with mental health. I was teaching a class to a bunch of sixth graders, and I said something, I was trying to talk with them about the benefits of wearing masks. Is there any kind of benefit that we could find in it? Maybe when you do deep breathing, you don't have to let other people know. And one of the students, a student that I least expected, put up their hand and said, after going through everything that we're going through, why would we ever need to hide something like that? And then it turned into a whole discussion of, what kids do when they're going through a hard time, and how breathing helps, and just all the kinds of things that they do. And it was just amazing to hear that. I think the fact that we're all going through this right now has really leveled the playing field in terms of making kids comfortable in talking about their experiences, and serving as a resource for each other. And helping each other out with the things that they're going through. There are so many more examples I could give, but just hearing one student bounce an idea off each other, and then everybody just chimed in and started talking about all the things they do when when they've gone through hard times, and just hearing it come from the kids themselves was really remarkable.
I really love that story. I haven't heard that before, that a boy or a girl who doesn't feel so pretty, who doesn't feel
actually a boy.
A boy doesn't feel so handsome. They feel as handsome as everybody else right now behind that mask. Barbara?
Yeah, I was actually extremely moved last week. I was on Zoom for quite a few weeks, and then the school was on Zoom for a while. And I was with a group of sixth grade boys who usually don't want to sit and talk about feelings. I met with them a few times, extraordinarily expressive and open. And every time I meet with them, I'm more and more impressed. And it dawned on me to ask them, when this is over and you're married and you have kids, what would you want to tell your kids about this COVID time? And one boy said, and it really brought tears to my eyes, he said, I'm going to tell my kids that I made it through, and that you could make it through anything. And I thought that was resilience in capital letters. And it's not that they weren't talking about devastating loneliness and worry and will I have a future, but there was also hope. And there was also a sense of a child's own agency, that I can find the coping within me, and I can impart it one day. For a sixth grader to imagine having children, I didn't know how they'd respond to that. So I think there's a certain sense that I can master a challenge. And sometimes the challenge may be so hard, which we all agree with, painfully, terribly hard. Another thing that just stays with me is when school reopened, I don't remember when, maybe October, the joy of those children coming into the building and finding their friends and seeing their desks, even though there was plexiglass, and seeing their teachers and learning and feeling normal was palpable. And the joy at small things, the first snowfall, the shrieks of happiness. Look, snow. They've learned to appreciate these things. There's so many things. I work with the younger kids on learning to self-regulate. We call it belly breathing. And a little girl was talking about a worry about a relative in the hospital with COVID. And she said, but I remembered that belly breathing stuff you talked about. And I did that, and I told my mommy to do it too. So kids are learning to cope, and there is a huge reservoir of resilience within.
Yeah. On Thursday, when an announcement was made in New York State that camps can open this summer, Ellie Brazil, the director of Camp Kaylee, was bombarded with emails, appreciative emails from parents. They only want to know if you can open camp on May 1st. Why do we have to wait until the end of June? Dr. Goldman, your thoughts?
Yeah, as far as the children, at the beginning of the year, we started at the beginning of the school year, and I went into all the classrooms, and we had spent the summer really preparing for these kids coming, and, there might be kids who are traumatized and kids who are very, very anxious. And I didn't want to put words into their mouths. So I just said, who here would say that this year is very different? And not a lot of kids raised their hands. So I asked, well, don't you see the plexiglass and the masks? And they looked at me and they said, in several classrooms, but we're at school, but we're with our friends. And yeah, those kids had gone through what we all went through, but when they came back to this place where they felt safe, where they felt welcomed, where they were connecting with their friends, where they had teachers who loved them, they were at school. And so this being such a different year really was secondary to that. And related to that, I would say the biggest thing I learned was maybe not from the kids, but from the teachers. Our teachers gave everything they had last year, and by the time the school year was over, they had nothing left. And somehow over the summer, they managed to give it some more and prepare and train. And we surveyed our teachers around Sukkot time to see what kind of skills that you learned over the summer will you be able to use going into this year. And we had so many incredible responses. I never thought I could learn technology. I'm able to manage my time, and just this resounding sense of, as long as I could be back with the kids, it's all worth it. So that's what I would take.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the most overused words over the past year has been essential workers and heroes, and that they've been targeted towards certain people. Everyone has been a hero. Everyone has been essential. I know that there are people out there that have gone above and beyond, and they deserve all the praise in the world. Every single person has been essential. Every single person has been a hero, from child, adolescent, adult, and everyone that you just mentioned. Rachey, Mirzeoff, what have you learned?
So on that note, to the parents that are listening, to me, as somebody who works in a school, your heroism in raising your children during this time, kol hakavod, really, to you, because you're dealing with your own things as well. So that's just first, I just wanted to add that. But, before this pandemic, there was a lot of talk, not just in our high school, but amongst high school educators. Where are our high school students going? They're stuck behind their phones all day. They're on social media apps. They're obsessed with themselves. They don't care about anything but their likes on their, social media apps. And everyone was concerned that our students, our adolescents are now robots. And I think for me, watching and hearing a student say, I crave seeing my friend. I crave so badly being in a classroom with my teacher. I miss school. I mean, to me, just seeing that they're human beings, they're really in there. They're not hiding behind their phone. Yes, they use their phone much more now because of Zoom and because of technology and all this, but they're really in there. And they really, really crave human interaction. They crave face-to-face interaction and relationships. And I just found that to be unbelievable, because these kids didn't just deal with, the pandemic themselves. They not only looked within and dealt with what they had to go through. We had people and teens in our community making challahs for people every Shabbos that couldn't leave their home. It wasn't just about, oh, they're human beings. They actually looked outward, the teens. They actually looked where they can be of service to others. And I think for them to hold on to the fact that they have something to give, even during the hardest times of probably their life, of the world's life, is something we really have to emphasize, because these teens have a lot to offer, and they don't necessarily hide behind their phone and behind social media.
Love that positive message. Dr. Blumenthal, I know that in your private practice, you've been dealing with anxiety for many years, long before COVID came upon us and just exacerbated the whole conversation about anxiety. And one of the most often asked questions that we have is about anxiety and the relationship of anxiety to depression and support that people need. Reassure us that even with all the anxiety that abounds, that we will get back to a normal state. We will get back to normal relationships. We will get back to a normal work environment. We will get back to our normal selves, whatever that is for each of us.
Well, the talk about normalcy gets me nervous, gets me anxious, because it's not good for business. I hope there won't be so much normalcy. But, actually, when you're thinking about the point, I think this relates to your question. And when everybody was talking about that poignant moment or that insight, I want to share with you, I'm not working in school, so I haven't had that experience with the kids, but a lot of the work that I and the head of the Ohel trauma team and the trauma team has been dealing with, unfortunately, many of the deaths or the long haul, some of the lingering symptoms that people are dealing with during these tragic times. There was one common response that I had caught me from surprise, and I think it's a very good lesson for where we are now, hopefully on the juncture and the brink that will be emerging from this pandemic. Many people, especially we're talking about now, almost about a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, during the height of the pandemic, and there were many deaths, and there were Zoom Shivas, and people were sitting Shiva via Zoom, and it had many drawbacks. And if there's ever a time when that silent presence, without even words are necessary, it was during those times. But one of the comments I heard from people that I hadn't expected was that when Shiva was over, so yes, they could get up and sit in a regular chair, and they could put on a fresh pair of clothing, and they could take a shower, but they didn't leave the house. They didn't go out there. They didn't have that experience. Some people have the custom of walking around the block. They didn't have that experience of taking the loss and reintegrating into the world. And they complained about it as something it was a form of deprivation. And that, I have to admit, with over about 25 years of dealing with bereavement, I hadn't anticipated. And I think it's a very good metaphor for what we're waiting to do. In a way, we've had this prolonged Shiva of being home and being confined and having to struggle with the dangers out there. And I think what we've been deprived of and what we look forward to is getting up and leaving our homes, getting out there, mingling and reintegrating into the world with everything that we've learned from these difficult times.
Thank you very much, everyone. This evening, we spoke about how are our kids doing. Teachers, social workers, psychologists give you the inside story from their experiences immediately following this conversation. All the participants, and we thank everyone for joining, are going to be sent a survey that will take you literally 2-3 minutes to complete. We very much appreciate it. We build upon your thoughts. We'd like to thank Sarah Diamond of Hidden Sparks for co-sponsoring this evening. Our panelists, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Mrs. Barbara Hollander, Ms. Rachey Mirzeoff, Dr. Ben Goldman. Evening, next week, Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Our session will focus on the 1-year anniversary of COVID and many experiences that people went through, especially acknowledging what the difficult time that people have had in this entire year, and also the best way to go forward. Thank you very much, everyone. Simchas Purim to all. Boy, does everyone need a Simchas Purim. Take care.